To cut a long story short, they contrived to get me out of the social enterprise, and they got someone in to the following day to be the chief executive of the organization that I'd set up and ran myself. Essentially, yeah, it's in my DNA. I think it's something that I've always been interested in. Even when I worked in government, I worked in areas that were related to areas of social justice, etc. So I was, I've always been concerned with those kind of issues.
Invisible Experts Podcast.
Hello, Michael. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Good to see you.
Oh, thank you so much. Welcome, everyone, to this new episode in our Invisible Experts podcast. Today, we are honored having Professor Roy, or Michael, as we know him. Thank you so much, Michael. So, first of all, if you don't mind, and perhaps for the audience, who you are and what you up to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Michael Roy. So I'm a professor at the University of Stirling. I'm professor of social innovation and sustainable organisations. So I've been working in the social enterprise space for a long time, both as a practitioner and as a researcher. I did my PhD some years ago on the health and wellbeing impacts of social enterprise at Glasgow Caledonian University, but I moved here to beautiful Stirling on the 1st of January of this year.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. Listen, I want to start with something which always I inspire me from you, right? Because we always tend to talk about this kind of like the top of the iceberg, but I want to go profound. So, for the audience, actually, Michael was a practitioner before, and he was in the cooperative movement. So my first question is okay, you are there, you've been working in the actual sector of cooperative, and then how come you decide to be an academic? What happened there? What inspired you?
I actually set up and ran a community interest company, Andrea. I wasn't the cooperative movement. I worked in the government for a long time. I worked in the government for over a decade, and there came a point where I left the government and became a consultant. And I was a very bad consultant. I wasn't very good at all at it. So I didn't enjoy it either. I didn't enjoy asking former colleagues for money, basically, was the bottom line. But I then, to cut a long story short, I set up and ran a social enterprise focused on people suffering from fuel poverty in my local neighbourhood, and managed to attract quite a bit of funding to the area. It was that was good, but it was controversial. It was controversial insofar as the relationship with a local authority was odd at times. I think that they didn't like us bringing money to the area and doing stuff ourselves. The relationship with the local authority and there's always a kind of power imbalance there with the third sector and the government and the public sector. So to cut a long story short, they contrived to get me out of the social enterprise, and they got someone in to the following day to be the chief executive of the organization that I'd set up and ran myself. So the following day, more or less, I enrolled in a master's program, master's in social research, and then I stayed at university ever since. After my master's, which I focused on SROI and my dissertation, they were setting up the UNIS Centre for Social Business and Health at Glasgow Caledonian at the time, and they really needed someone who knew a bit about social enterprise first and foremost, but a bit about the policy landscape as well. So I kind of fell into their lap as it was. So I was happy to work with some brilliant people at Glasgow Caledonian, and they offered me a PhD studentship. So I kind of committed to financial suicide and actually took up an offer of a PhD scholarship, studentship. You know what it's like,
Yeah.
and it's a tough life, but at the same time, it's brilliant. It was a wonderful opportunity to have a paid period where I was undertaking my PhD. So, and basically, I haven't looked back since. So it's all about serendipity, being in the right place at the right time, and a variety of other things. And I suppose being outgoing and liking people, liking meeting people, and building networks, and all sorts of things like that. I don't think there was anything planned involved in it, and here I am, find myself as a professor nowadays.
That's amazing. Sometimes you ended up in places that you never really thought you would be ended up, right?
Totally, totally.
So, Michael, what do you think inspired you to help your local neighborhood? I mean, what is this inspiration coming from? Perhaps your family was like up to, maybe help people around, or it just happened for you naturally to try to make your neighborhood or society better.
I don't, I don't think I've ever been asked this question before. It's an interesting one. I come from a large family and I was the oldest of six children. So times were tough at times. I'm not trying to pretend that it was as bad as many other people have it, but at the same time, it was tough at times financially. And we were naturally kind of left wing anyway, I suppose. And we always had discussions around the dinner table, around issues of social justice, etc. So social justice is in my DNA, I guess. And yeah, I mean, social enterprise is not something I was probably doing social enterprise before I even knew the term. I was using terminology like community enterprise, community business, and so on and so forth. But social economy, so that sort of thing. But no label really stuck until social enterprise really took off in Scotland, and then I've been using that label ever since. But essentially, yeah, it's in my DNA. I think it's something that I've always been interested in. Even when I worked in government, I worked in areas that were related to areas of social justice, etc. So I was, I've always been concerned with those kind of issues.
Wow, that's very inspiring, right? Sometimes, we do these naturally, right?
Yeah.
To try to make the world better. Because even though when you changed your profession, let's say, you also stay in our area. Like perhaps, we help society from, another dimension, which is academia, but still, So as an academic, right, how hard is to transfer knowledge from your perspective? Because one of the things that I always try to do differently is like, okay, of course we need to produce science in terms of papers and writing and do all the research and conduct rigorous research, but then how can we transform this into tangible impact? From your experience, what do you think is going to happen?
Depends on what you mean by tangible impact. I mean, there are impacts all sorts of different ways. You can have impacts without even realizing having impacts, just by involving a variety of people and bringing them into the fold. And I'll explain what I mean by that. I'm the editor of Social Enterprise Journal, so I'm the editor in chief. And I took up that role around about 2 to 3 years ago. I can't actually remember. It was about 3 years ago now. COVID, it happened, and everything.
Yeah.
Time seems to have done strange things. So it was probably 4 or 5 years ago. Who knows? And one of the things I was very keen to do was broaden the associate editor, broaden the number of and the quality of submissions from people from the Global South. And so I've been deliberately trying to attract associate editors and do it very deliberately to think about where those people are based and the connections that they have. So we just don't have one in South America at the moment. Funnily enough, I was speaking to somebody just the other day about a Latin American editor. But really, so in some ways, that's a very deliberate way to bring people into the fold. So the impact of that, frankly, is not going to be seen until we start seeing quality submissions and quality papers and increased knowledge of what social enterprise is like in different parts of the world, whether it's sub-Saharan Africa, whether it's India, whether it's the Far East, or whether it's wherever. So in some ways, yes, that's I suppose an intangible output at the moment, but hopefully will become more tangible over time.
Yeah,
But
sure.
then we have things like the everyday impact that you have with working and dealing with people, like policymakers. I've always worked with policymakers, and people ask me, how do you influence policymakers? And I'm saying, well, you go out and talk to them. You bump into them you move in the same circles as them. You go to the same events as them. You discuss with them. You have discussions. Before you know it, they're asking you to do maybe small pieces of work for them, and very often we'll perhaps do them as a loss leader or whatever. But generally speaking, it's about knowing who the key people are, knowing who the key decision makers are, and speaking to them and making sure you have a good rapport with them. And that can be at a kind of local level, whether it's local government or whether it's national government, the Scottish government here, or whether it's international. It's at the OECD level or the United Nations, the ILO, for instance. And I've done work for all of these bodies, and it's just a case of being known for being good at what you do. And before you know it, people are coming to your door and you're asking your advice on various things. I was recently involved in a working group. I was the only academic on the working group, looking at a policy related to the National Strategy for Economic Transformation in Scotland. And we came up with a new term, which I'm not actually that keen on, the inclusive and democratic business models, because I think we have enough terms. But we introduced this new term it's an umbrella concept because there was people from all over the place. You talked about the cooperative sector, but there was co-ops people, there was mutuals people, there was employee ownership people, there was social enterprise people, the third sector people, all in the same room, all from the kind of left to the right of the spectrum, mostly left to be fair, but mostly left to the right of the spectrum, if you like, all in the same room, and we're all talking about the challenges that we face, and wouldn't it be good if we could X, Y, and Z, coming up with a series of recommendations. So yeah, I was involved in that. I was also involved in that wearing my Development Trust Association Scotland hat. So recently I was asked to become the chair of the national body for development trusts. Development trust is an odd term that we use in Scotland, but it's basically very not necessarily small, but usually small, geographically based organisations that are focused on local socio-economic development. So a lot of them do social enterprise stuff. They're not all necessarily social enterprises, but they often have a social enterprise dimension to the work that they do. They certainly have a very enterprising and innovative approach to socio-economic development in their area. So I've been the chair of that body now for the last. This is my third year as chair. So again, wearing that hat, you're asked to comment on various. Well, to be fair, the chief executive is asked to comment on things, but inevitably we have conversations around what's going on in our area, what's happening, what about this particular policy, how's this being rolled out, how is your local authority interpreting this policy, it's terrible, isn't it, that the money's been decreased for this particular initiative, so on and so forth. So yeah,
Wow.
so I can kind of have a handle on what's happening at a national and a local level, as well as doing my day job as well as an academic.
Wow, man, you are super proactive. And I just like to go back to this concept of social justice very briefly, right? Because I love it, especially because, okay, fair enough, someone like me from the other part of the world, how we come across with Scotland, okay? So in my group of friends, we always have two things: Highlander, the famous TV show, remember? And then you have on the other side William Wallace. right?
Right.
The Braveheart movie, that was a fantastic movie. You know, I think they all portray social justice. In our sector, in the sustainable sector, Scotland, from my perspective, at least in Europe, is one of the leaders. So do you think you, as an academic, and also like your colleagues who works in this area, they have this kind of William Wallace attitude towards society, or perhaps, you know, the Highlander attitude towards society?
It's a great question. Funnily enough, if my office window was the other way around, I would be looking out at the office at the Wallace Monument now, which
Oh,
is a
wow. Okay.
monument with he's raising a sword. So when I go from my car to at the car park, I can walk across here. We have a Wallace Monument here in Stirling, which overlooks the Battle of Stirling. It overlooks the site of the Battle of Stirling Bridge, which is the big battle at the end of the film Braveheart. Which, of course, the film didn't have any kind of bridge. It didn't even have a river, I don't think, but never mind. No one said it was historically accurate. Anyway, yeah, I think there is something in that, in a proximity to a much stronger neighbour and a history of conflict. Conflict is too strong a word, I think. A history of coming up against people whose values don't necessarily mesh with your own. So everyone thinks, well, not everyone, but many people think, you know, that the British people are kind of all the same, and we're not actually. It's an amalgam of and a melting pot of different cultures. So the Welsh people, the Scottish people, the English people, and the people in Northern Ireland. Some of whom identify as Irish and others identify as British, but we won't go there at the moment. So Scottish people, I wouldn't ever say that Scottish people were colonised, because colonised is just too strong a word. Frankly, we were very energetic with our neighbours, England. By this time, England and Scotland had become the United Kingdom, and we were quite enthusiastic at colonising other countries with our English neighbours. But that said, I think there are a lot of parts of Scottish culture that have been diminished and reduced because of our proximity to England, and in actual fact because of deliberate policy. So there's a deliberate policy, for example, of crushing indigenous languages like Gaelic and Scots in schools. So kids were punished at school for speaking Scots or Gaelic, and as a result, particularly Gaelic is more or less, you know, there are very few people now speaking Gaelic in their day-to-day lives. Really, only the Western Isles of Scotland, the very fringes of Europe, does Gaelic survive day to day. Although, to be fair, Duolingo has been terrific at promoting Gaelic around the world, and we have something like 500,000 people, at least at its peak, speaking Gaelic on Duolingo. However, your point is and your question is actually well made and well constructed. I think we have a commitment to social justice, yes, and it almost as if but at the same time, that's not to say that all English people are more right-wing than Scottish people. Generally speaking, they are, but of course, there are pockets of England as well, in the northwest of England, and particularly the northeast of England, that have had the same industrial past, post-industrial realities, where all the industry is closed down. The heavy industry and the central belt of Scotland in particular was well known for its heavy industry. And when that all went, then the people suffered, communities suffered, and whole generations of people were thrown out of work. And all the way through the Thatcher period, where she was having deliberate policy of closing down many industries and reconfiguring the economy of the UK, then people suffered. And I think because of the suffering, I think that the commitment to social justice shines through. And of course, the very first, not the very first, but the most recent movements came out of that, and social enterprise came out of that period. The community business movement, the community enterprise movement, and the social enterprise movement. They all emerged as a result of many particularly European projects, in order to try to remedy some of the industrial or some of the damage that had been done to our post-industrial communities. So yeah, that's I suppose where the story picks up, the modern story of social enterprise anyway. But you're right, we have a proud history of this stuff going back to Robert Owen and his mill, which is about 40 miles south of here, southeast of here. That was in the late 18th, very early 19th century. But then we have the world's oldest documented cooperative, the Fenwick Weavers Society in Ayrshire in 1776, I think it was. And that's the oldest cooperative that's been documented so far. Yeah. So yeah, we have a proud history of this stuff, proud history of social justice, and I suppose that collides in thinking about the modern social enterprise movement and what it's all about, where it comes from, what its DNA is like. It is very different to a social entrepreneur, a heroic figure who do stuff by themselves in inner city London, for example.
Sure. That's very interesting because, like the way that we perceive, the Scottish movement in terms of sustainable organizations is that this kind of resilience and social justice driven DNA, right? And, just to kind of like finalize this segment, like people have the opportunity to get to know you, your context, how come you now become an authority in a way in our sector. One of the things that I love the most is how you become professor so quickly, because it's hard, right? I mean, as you put it before, you just happen to have this PhD opportunity, and then we remembered when you were a PhD student, and nowadays you are a professor. That's fantastic. So do you reckon also it comes with this kind of Wallace, like proactivity to self-liberation and accomplish this kind of purpose, because it's hard. So first of all, how you did it, and then how would you suggest people like us who, inspired by you guys, we can get like to the objective, working hard as you did?
Well, I'm going to say it's all obviously down to me and my hard work, but of course it's not. It's all about being in the right place at the right time. And I was very lucky in that I worked in a research centre, and working in a research centre, and because of my background in government, I can write very well, and that's frankly 70 to 80% of the solution, if you like, to try to churning out papers at high quality papers quite quickly. And I was lucky as well. I was surrounded by some really wonderful people who taught me the ropes, and gave me opportunities and supported me financially to go to conferences. But I also shared a room with Simon Teasdale for 10 years, and Simon and I mean, we're best friends, and obviously I would never tell him this to his face. But Simon is, among the very, very best scholars in this space as well. So I learned an awful lot from him as well. Of course, he wouldn't ever admit learning stuff from me, but I'm sure between ourselves it was a nice mix of people who were doing very good work at a time that was the social enterprise was a zeitgeist, if you like, in Scotland as well. There was lots of money going into it through the social enterprise strategy. There was lots of opportunities. I mean, we're opening up a brand new field. I mean, the whole idea of social enterprise as a health and well-being intervention, which, as you know, I did for my PhD. It meant, therefore, we could apply to funders like health funders that would never imagine funding social enterprise projects. So we got a really nice grant from the MRC, the Medical Research Council, Economic and Social Research Council, jointly. And that then led to another project, led to a nice big European project that we were working with at the time. And that led to another big project and another big project. And before you know it, you have the requirements you need for promotion. We also had a master's program that I was the program director of, and managed to do some teaching, but not so much teaching that took me away from my research.
Sure.
So I think the trick is to find a balance that's right for you, and a balance whereby you're able to turn out and you're able to generate good, particularly empirical papers fairly quick. And we had access to that because of the terrific team that we had, led by really, really smart people. And yeah, it's just a case of meeting the requirements then, eventually you do. Eventually you meet the requirements, and before you know it, you're being promoted. And I mean, I didn't apply to be a professor, I applied to be a leader. And my references came back and said, are you sure this guy's a reader? Because he meets the requirements according to your own requirements for professor. And sure enough, they took a gamble on me and said, yeah, you should be a professor. Before you know it, I'm leading research group. I'm bringing in my own projects and, doing stuff all over the world. And as you say, being considered an authority on things.
No, it's cool. I mean, come on, guys. I mean, like, I never been afraid to respect experience, right? Because it's very important for us. I mean, by all means, we didn't born with all the knowledge. So it's very good to learn from people who are, a little bit ahead and learn from them, in a nice way. So if you would you agree, like, to sum up, first, to improve our writing skills? Secondly, pick a good mentor, right? Third, have a good team. Fourth, improve and build up a proper social network. And the fifth, of course, is the hard work, right? Do you think these five would be like ideal to make it eventually?
That's a great summing up. And I suppose six is luck and being in the right place at the right time.
Okay.
And you can't account for that, because frankly, there are really hardworking people that just can't catch a break.
Yeah.
They're really hard, and it's really hard. And I know I'm in a position of how should I put it? I understand that okay, I have a kind of working class background, but I'm white, I'm male, and I have a number of, and I live in the global north, and there are people working in incredibly difficult circumstances in other places. So I suppose the last thing I would say to that is to be humble and basically to learn from everyone. You can learn from absolutely everyone. I go along to and I get involved in PhD summer schools, and as you know, we and the conferences we both attended, and I love learning from the PhD students. I just think they have the most enthusiasm, the most original ideas, and because they have scope and the time to look at them and to break new ground. So I just think it's about learning. Have that attitude about learning from everyone and not thinking you're better than anyone else.
Sure. And I always love this, Michael, I have to be honest, because having met all of you, this kind of group of scholars that work in the social enterprise sector, sustainable sector, you're always super horizontal, right? We never, or at least me, I can speak on myself, like I never really felt that, there was such a hierarchy. You're always like super direct and always willing to help us. So that's very important. And, as a proof of that, you humbly accept our invitation to our podcast, because it's not easy, hey? I mean, for people who actually seen it, it's hard because people have their own agenda and they're too busy and stuck with their own projects. So thank you for that. So today's episode is about, Brexit and the role of sustainable organizations, enterprises, and social enterprises in this new Brexit era, right? I was actually in 2016 in remember, in this research camp at the EMES conference in Scotland, when Leave won, the referendum.
Yeah, I remember it well because I hosted it. Remember in Glasgow?
Yeah, of course. So I want to ask you, how has Brexit shaped, in a way, nowadays, your research and approach to understanding the role of social enterprise in the UK right now?
It's a very difficult question, to be honest, mainly because we've had COVID now, and COVID kind of overtook the agenda for quite a number of years, but I'll try and answer it the best I can. I also need to caveat what I'm about to say by saying I'm not an expert in Brexit, and frankly, I don't think anyone is. I think that's the problem, is that we don't have people who understand. Certainly didn't understand what the implications were back in 2016. It was horrible. I remember we were all in that group, and people were crying, and people could believe. I mean, I don't think even the Leave side, they could believe that they'd won. And they looked yeah, it was somewhat of a Pyrrhic victory, I think, for them. Okay, so in terms of social enterprise and research, I think what's happened is that because of the amount of uncertainty that transpired since, because we didn't leave in 2016, of course. We left in whatever it was it 2020, 2021, in fact, 1st of January 2021. And that period of uncertainty really affected a lot of people, particularly people who were EU citizens who were living in the UK. And a lot of them just went home. So what we found was there was labour shortages all over the place, particularly in the NHS, but particularly in academia as well. I don't know if you remember, the Eunice Centre at one point was like Little Italy. It was like we had a big group of Italian scholars, most of whom either went home or moved on to other places. So that uncertainty certainly affected our research. Then there was the uncertainty over European funding. Now, one of the things about Scottish universities as compared to other universities in the UK is that we were very, very good at getting European funding. We were by per capita, we had more funding from the EU than England. I think. Now, especially for a university like Glasgow Caledonian, we carved out a really excellent niche in getting Erasmus funding, and Erasmus funding particularly for social innovation projects. So Mark Anderson was hand over fist. He was easily the leading university in the UK for Erasmus funding, and one of the leading universities in Europe, frankly, because we were getting funding for developing social innovation projects in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, and all over the place. And he was doing great, wonderful work, honestly, wonderful work. And then, of course, Erasmus is totally stopped now. We're out of the Erasmus program altogether. And in actual fact, because of the uncertainty we were out of Horizon 2020 for a while, we're back in it now. But again, there was, even in the lead up to us formally leaving the Horizon program for a time, I detected, and I know this for a fact because I've spoken to a number of partners, that they didn't want the UK as partners, or indeed, it's certainly not to lead projects. So they felt that, and I felt this as well, is that there was a whether a conscious or an unconscious bias when we were submitting projects to the EU. Because you remember, because you were on one of them. And it got, in every single year, we got a mark better. And this project was awesome, wasn't it? It was really awesome.
It was amazing.
It was great. And I just felt that whether it was unconsciously or not, there was too much uncertainty. People didn't know what was going to happen. And even though the UK government was saying yes, if they got European funding, we would back them, and with the required cash, whatever. But just because of that uncertainty, I think it did a lot of damage. It did a lot of damage, not just to our success in terms of getting European funding, but also in terms of maintaining our networks. Because these types of projects don't happen overnight. They happen over a period of many years in terms of building up networks and maintaining those networks and friendships and because academia is all built on friendships and networks. It really is. So when you lose momentum like that, when things come to a juddering halt, then it takes some years to then build up momentum again. So I think these big, certainly the large projects are all built on momentum. It's not just academia though. It was things like we had Scottish partners all over the place. We had in European projects, social enterprise, social economy projects, and the Interreg projects, for example, with quite a few Interreg projects over the years, and those involving ESF and ERDF funding as well, again on social enterprise. And you would see Scottish partners popping up all over Europe, being involved in these projects, and that all stopped more or less overnight. And I think that was a real shame. And we felt isolated. We felt, and then we had COVID, and I just feel that, and it's not. I don't know how you feel about this, but it's just not the same. See, when you can't. You can maintain relationships and you can maintain friendships over in a medium like this, but you can't make new friends in a medium like this, because it's too superficial. And when you're designing and building a large project like that, you really need to know the people you're working with.
Sure.
You really get to know them well when you're working with them. And frankly, if they don't deliver, then no matter how good a friend they are, then you're not going to involve them in the next project. So really. It's a combination of being good friends with people, but also having the trust in people as well. It's very difficult to build up trust
Sure.
over the internet.
Yeah, I think in a way, like there was a feeling, and for those who are not familiar with the Brexit concept, it was basically like the UK leaving the European Union, right? And then, maybe of course, you know how media works. So the actual result is like, we don't want to be with you because we think we are better, right? So as you put it before, there was this kind of unconscious, rejection of how come we've been friends for so long, and then you don't want us because like, to be fair, the Brexit campaign was very, very hard, isn't it? Like, was very full on in this sentiment of, like, Europeans are over abusing us, our generosity and so on. And especially, like, it's very hard because this, as you put it in the beginning, like Scotland and England and Wales and Northern Ireland, okay, they are together, but different worlds with different cultures and with different things. And it wasn't like an entire, right? Like,
I mean, Scotland was 62% pro-EU. We wanted to stay in the EU. And that has had, that's only increased the democratic deficit between Scotland and London, in terms of our, about the 2014 referendum for independence, which was lost. But that's, again, fueled the independence movement in Scotland. And right now it's sitting about 50-50 at the moment. That's a starting point, for it.
Wow.
Yeah, so if we had another campaign, then it's very likely that Scotland would become independent, which is the reason why we're not going to be given another opportunity.
Okay, wow. And of course, because I think one of the reasons, this is my very, like, simple understanding, that the reason why Scotland didn't want to become independent, it was because they want to be part of the EU bloc, right?
Yeah. That was one of the arguments. If you left the UK, then you would have to reapply, and you would be at the back of the queue, and there's this magical queue, and they say no, you'll be back at the queue, and because you don't have a central bank, you need to set up a central bank with your own currency. That all that takes time, and there would be so much uncertainty, and it would cause chaos, and businesses would collapse. They would have people leaving Scotland and so on and so forth. And yet, you look at the chaos of Brexit, and you just think, I wish we hadn't done that. But
yeah,
we would have been better off independent within Europe. I have no doubt whatsoever.
Let's see. So going back to the Brexit and the social enterprise or sustainable landscape, from your perspective, what has been the most significant impact on Brexit on the UK social enterprise / sustainable landscape?
I think it's a number of different ways, none of which are immediately obvious. Okay, so of course there's going to be social enterprises are going to be trading with Europe and people trading with social enterprises in the UK, which is harder now. It's harder because barriers have been put in place. So that's harder, and I suspect that a lot of social enterprises, frankly, don't even bother anymore. So and there's all sorts of issues with supply chains and additional tariffs and so on and so forth. I've also mentioned the cost of living crisis, which was actually exacerbated both by Brexit and by COVID, but particularly by Brexit. I mean, we don't that's not really high on the agenda in the news, but frankly, if everyone experienced COVID and not everyone had the same issues that the UK have had. The UK have more or less had flat wages for the last decades now. It's been very, very tough in the UK in terms of our cost of living and in terms of the increase in prices everywhere. It's been really tough. Now, what that means, of course, is that a lot of social enterprises are therefore having to deal with acute problems in their neighbourhoods, and they're not necessarily getting the funds that they need in order to address these problems, because, of course, with a credit crisis comes a public sector funding crisis as well, because already we're talking about cutting, filling a £22 billion black hole. And I say black hole, and I don't want to go into the intricacies of public finances, but there's a lot of rhetoric around at the moment that, I heard Keir Starmer say that public finances are in an unprecedentedly bad state, and yet, we built the NHS after the Second World War, for instance, we completely bankrupted the country after the Second World War, and yet we had COVID, not even that long ago, and yet he's now saying that the public finances are in an unprecedentedly bad state. But that aside, the bottom line is that we're certainly in the near future, we're not seeing any more funding likely to come down to local authorities and therefore down to social enterprises. And that's been very, very tough. I've never seen it so bad as this, Andre. It's really, really tough in terms of the amount of money we have to play with. We're seeing also, I was going to give you some figures, but I don't want to give you figures because they might be wrong. But I was at a conference recently, and somebody said something like 50 to 100 million have been taken out of the sector literally over the last couple of years.
Wow.
And it's really, really tough out there. So social enterprises are really innovative and they're great at running on sellotape and string, but you can't do that. You can't live like that forever. It's just unsustainable. And you have burnout with volunteers. You have burnout with people dealing with social problems day in and day out that are just getting worse and worse and worse. So I don't want to paint things as doom and gloom, but Brexit on top of COVID and everything has just been it's a worrying place at the moment. It's a worrying times, and yeah, and we
That's
can't
very
expect
worrying.
social enterprise to fix all these problems either. And really, a lot of the rhetoric is, well, we'll just pile it onto social enterprises, or we'll pile it onto the third sector, generally speaking, or we'll just get the third sector to run that because they're cheaper, they're more efficient, and blah blah blah. But there comes a point where things are going to just collapse, and we're nearly at that point, I would suggest, at the moment.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because, like back in 2019, I don't know if you remember the Social Enterprise UK report. I mean, the social enterprise sector by itself, it was basically like contributing to the 3% of the GDP. That was impressive, right? Because the transformation, I mean, social enterprises have been always there through cooperatives, associations, and so on, credit unions. But then in 2019, there was this report which was very promising to our sector. So this is the dilemma, right? Because from one side, obviously, social enterprises needed to be fueled, right?
Yeah.
Especially nowadays. But now it happens that social enterprise, perhaps one of the solutions, for the chaos caused by these kind of like decisions. Brexit, of course, the hit of COVID and so on. So do you think, like social enterprises would be navigating this new post-Brexit era, and they would perhaps contribute to solve what it was created in the first place?
Yeah, I do. And they deal with the most acute problems in society, the most, and work with the most vulnerable people in society, and the ones that are most hard to reach by public services, etc. So I definitely think that social enterprises hold much of the solution. The trouble is, of course, and I mentioned the word power imbalance right at the very start, and I often think that particularly local authorities, they don't necessarily view social enterprises as having the same solution, the solutions that they often do. I'm not explaining this very well. I think that people often underestimate the power of the third sector in their
Yeah.
neighborhoods and what it does, because very often it's not visible. They're not very good at shouting about it often. They're not very good at communicating what the impact they're having is. But as you say, they have an enormous impact upon GVA. And they, in that report I was mentioning earlier, that I was involved in, I had some say in terms of how the phrasing of the forward talked about the IDBM's report, the Inclusive and Democratic Business Models, and 1 in 10 people in the entire world, work in the cooperative sector. This is not a fringe, or the cooperatives and mutual sector. This is not a fringe activity, this, and yet we talk about from the margins to the mainstream. We talk about the third sector, the social enterprise sector, as being something which is fringe and something which we should be giving more attention to. But really, it is a major economic player already. It's just, of course, we don't think about them economically because of our bizarre way we define economics in terms of finances. Often
Yeah.
we equate economics with how well the FTSE 500 are doing, or we equate economics with how the share prices are doing, etc. But in actual fact, or GDP. But in actual fact, a lot of the activity that social enterprises do can't be captured, or are not currently captured that way. But of course, we've had this discussion for I don't know how many decades now around GDP being a very poor measure of economic activity, full stop, but never mind economic activity that can't be measured by GDP.
Yeah.
So I think that there has to be another kind of relationship, a reset of a relationship between government and the third sector, full stop. I think that there needs to be acknowledged that they have the solutions to many of the problems. They are rooted and embedded within the communities in which they serve, and rooted and embedded in ways that the public sector often can't be, and because it's too expensive to do that, if you know what I mean. So
Sure.
acknowledging what parts of the economy are good at what they're doing, so that whether it's the for-profit sector, whether it's the public sector, or whether it's the third sector, and it's just about using our strengths in its entirety and not thinking that the entire economy is just that part of the economy. You've got a massive public sector, and you've got a massive third sector as well that deals with many of the problems that are created by poor politics, bad politics,
Exactly.
poor
And
policy decisions.
yeah, and also like I like the last phrase, right? Because we go into basically the segment about policies and the politics of it. Because this is my perspective by all means. I think now there is like short circuit in between the state, which represents the politics and the policies, and society. Nowadays, I think in the West, we have such a big crisis, like the state basically like stop, this is my perspective, of course, talking to communities. They don't have empathy anymore. They just talk it to themselves, and they see how they can make anything possible to profit themselves, right? And I think in this case, like, you know, in our sector, the third sector, of course, the social enterprise sector, you know, I think undeniably being affected. So I want to ask you whether how policy changes post-Brexit, you know, have affected funding for social enterprises. And if you think, are there any new avenues of support or perhaps barriers to, you know, kind of push our sector again back to the track that we were before?
Yeah, I think definitely the Brexit, coupled with the cost of living crisis, coupled with the post-COVID, or we're kind of still in COVID really, but the post-COVID reality is that it makes for very grim reality for social enterprises, as well as for many other parts of the economy. The reality is, of course, as well, there's no new money, and therefore there's no new initiatives coming out. You know, so now don't get me wrong, there are old stuff being repackaged as new things. You know, but really there's no new money in the round. So we're having to work with what we've got. You know, there is some opportunities in terms of procurement opportunities as well, you know, because there's an enormous amount of public services that are delivered by social enterprises. And we're seeing that many social enterprises are involved and engaged in this space, although it's very difficult to, it's very difficult to access public procurement for a variety of reasons. I've written some stuff on this recently. But it can be done, and public services, they need to be delivered. They need to be delivered somehow. So it is an opportunity. Post-Brexit, I suppose one opportunity is that we're not bound by European procurement rules anymore, and so that might be an opportunity to re-examine whether or not there might be more opportunities we could give to social enterprises. I mean, I think what we need is some imagination, and what I'm seeing is a poverty of imagination at the moment, poverty of, and I don't want to keep going on at policymakers, because I was a policymaker myself, and I know how difficult it is. You know, you speak to policymakers face to face, and in their personal moments, they're telling you just how grim it is inside government. When you haven't got any money, what can you do? You know, your choices are limited. But at the same time, you know, that therefore necessity is the mother of invention, right? And you need entrepreneurs, you need entrepreneurs to come to the fore and to say, let's do this differently. Let's get people around the table, and let's get people working together from across the sectors. See whether or not we can create something that, you know, using co-production mechanism, whether or not we can come up with some solution that actually might benefit us all, you know, by working in partnership. So that's the kind of thing I would like to see more of. But like I say, there's a poverty of imagination at the moment, and I don't know the answer. I don't know the solution. What I do know is that social enterprises have got so much to offer, and I just wish that the government, in all its shape and sizes, would speak to them more, and to speak to not just the local deliverers, but also the local. But also their the facility, the bodies, the intermediary bodies as well. They get so much to add to the conversation as well. Of course, I would say that being the chair of one of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting because, you know, like, I agree with you. Even though policymakers, they want to do more for the sector, there is basically no money for it.
Yeah.
And then I really love the idea, as you proposed, you know, perhaps to push policies in order to encourage these kind of like partnerships in between different sectors, you know, perhaps like maybe even contracting, right? Maybe contracting social enterprises in order to working together in order to in a way, overcome these challenges of the post-Brexit era and COVID era. That was sadly happened kind of like not simultaneously, but kind of at the same time, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
want to talk.
we've got examples where that's happened and it's worked really well. We've got public social partnerships in Scotland, and they've worked really well. We did, Simon and I and a few colleagues, Francesca and others, we and Michaela, we did a nice review of the public social partnership model in Scotland, and it worked really well. Yes, it needs time and you need partnerships to develop. But it goes back to what I was saying earlier around creating research projects. When you create any project, you really need to get to know the people you're working with, and you need to get rid of the power differentials, and you really need to trust the people you're working with, and that's difficult sometimes. It's difficult for public sector folk in particular, because they're often, they're top of the food chain, and unfortunately, when they don't have any money.
No, I agree. Like even us as a social enterprise based in the UK, we were lucky pre-Brexit to, take advantage of very interesting programs. Do you remember these kind of BC research links when we had the opportunity to, work and interact with people from all over the world? And then I remembered my last project was with DICE through the British Council, that was basically working with people from Egypt, Pakistan, Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa, and it was fantastic. Basically, like they were giving us this opportunity to, interact with other social enterprises or other companies from other countries and make profit out of it, and also at the same time create value. But that sadly is not happening anymore, as you said, because there is no money. So how come you're going to invest in these partnerships if there is no money for it? But I think the idea that you just mentioned before, to allocate some cost in order to promote and push these kind of partnerships, would be ideal, right? I want to talk about sustainability and innovation, right?
Okay.
Because I really love what you said before. Innovation also comes with the power of, partnership and collaborate with other people, because of course everybody bring about new ideas, especially, these kind of cultural aspects. From my perspective and reading through your line, it's very important, as you said before, about this kind of partnership between you and the Italians, which is very worthy, right? When we want to push new projects and create new initiatives and build up something new. So from your perspective, of course, how are sustainable organizations and social enterprises innovating to deal with these changes brought by Brexit?
Well, it's difficult, but I am always amazed at the level of innovation and the level of imagination of organizations, and people, frankly, because organizations don't innovate. People innovate. And the bottom is the bottom line. And you see all sorts of cool things happening all over the place. At the moment we're seeing more emphasis, for example, in circular economy. And one of the things that I'm working on at the moment is a project led by Raphael Ziegler in Canada, looking at the interface, if you like, of the social economy and cooperatives in particular, because they're very into cooperatives in Quebec, and circular economy, to see whether or not social economy could be seen as a vehicle for, because a vehicle for delivering circular economy activities. And of course, they all do, and their morals and ethos is almost completely aligned if you go looking for it. So I think particularly circular economy activities and getting involved in that type of work, I think that's a big opportunity, particularly as more and more private sector organizations wake up to the opportunities of being involved in circular economy, and being a lot more sustainable. And a lot of, as we know, a lot of organizations are doing this, or at least they're talking about becoming a lot more sustainable. There's a lot of greenwashing still going around. A lot of it is very performative, but at the same time, I don't necessarily have a problem with the performativity as long as they're actually delivering as well. And when you have organizations that are gigantic and they're actually doing stuff, even if it's for signaling to to consumers that they have a green label or whatever, as long as they're having an improvement in the environment, then terrific, because they can have a significant impact. The trouble is, of course, is that there's not enough of this happening, and there's not enough of this happening everywhere in the economy. I think lobbyists are more or less tied all this up. So, in other words, they're doing enough to signal that they're doing stuff, but in actual fact, as we know, and it was I think the report came out, was it yesterday, day before, to say that we're nowhere near. We're something like 2% of we've reduced carbon emissions by 2%, and it needs to be reduced by 50% to get back on in terms of the targets. So we're nowhere near where we need to be. So I think social enterprises can play a far bigger role in that agenda. I think that they're going back to the people that are involved in the social enterprise movement. They're generally speaking, they get it immediately, and you don't need to convince them that it's the future. Also young people as well, young people who aren't necessarily involved in social enterprises at the moment, but I see it all the time. You don't need to convince young people that that another model is possible, and another you could create another model of business that is not about necessarily profit maximizing, or it might be a small amount of profit, but you know what I'm saying, is to create impact in society. And again, you don't need to convince them. They just instinctively get it. But what they need, though, is the knowledge and the guidance and the support for them to even understand that another model is possible. And they don't always get that in modern business schools. So what we're trying, certainly here at Stirling and certainly in my old place, was that we're trying to at least introduce people, even if it's lightly, to the idea that there are different models of business that they can choose. So in terms of sustainability of businesses, there are all sorts of work going ahead on things like green supply chains and so on and so forth. In terms of Brexit, I think Brexit has made it more difficult, I just think it's made it more difficult because of the whole uncertainty, because every pound is a prisoner now. I just feel that if people are choosing between, a more sustainable solution versus a solution that's cheaper, they're going to have to go with a cheaper solution. I don't think there is enough incentives for people to choose green solutions all the time. I think there has to be a lot more, again, imagination given to policy interventions to help businesses make decisions around. That's because, frankly, the stakes are too high. The stakes are far too high. I mean, we're talking about existential, and we might be okay in the UK. Scotland might be nice, might be slightly warmer and slightly wetter as a result. But at the same time, particularly in the global south, we're seeing wholesale devastation of community. Yeah. And so something needs to happen. Something needs to change radically. And quite frankly, it's the onus has to be on those who are making the most mess, and that's the richest people in society and the richest countries in the world. So, yeah. Sorry for that rambling response, but it's a difficult. Frankly, it's a very difficult one, and I don't think Brexit has helped at all.
It's difficult. It's difficult times, and actually, what you just said, I picked this kind of greenwashing thing because this is, undeniable that there are some companies that they were basically profiting out from this kind of green image, right? Yeah. They basically say that they are super green and they're making green impact, but as you said before, they don't deliver in what they're supposed to be doing, right? And then, actually these few days, I've been listening to Donald Trump talking about these, environmentalists. And this is very interesting because what I see is more than ever, you can see how, being more environmental threats growth. Yeah. And now here you go, you have this dilemma. Okay, you have basically that this, society depending on economy, And we also, like in our sector, we also depending on resources if we want to move forward. But then you have the environment, threaten this kind of growth. So I think we just come out with, the choice of what would you like then? Would you like to keep doing profit with finite resources, or would you like to, leave from our people in the future better resources to survive? And he was like brutally honest about it. Okay, health is fine, but when it comes to the environment, I don't want to know anything about it, because, and he puts it, our like blood gold, which is basically petrol and oil, right? So from your perspective, how are we gonna balance it out? Because on the one hand, we've got these people who claim that they're doing better for the environment, but they don't actually doing it. It's just they're doing for the sake of the marketing. And then on the other side, there must be a balance, because being more environmental, of course, you're gonna make in the short term some impact in terms, in economic terms, to any sector really, and more, for the from the employees, from some, like micro enterprises and medium enterprises. So what do you think about it?
I think that we need to have wholesale change. We just can't go along. We can't tinker about the edges. And unfortunately, it's going to take a gigantic catastrophe in order for people to wake up to that fact.
Yeah.
There's a really excellent book. It came out a few years ago by Kim Stanley Robinson. It's a science fiction novel called The Ministry for the Future. And in that, he talks, at the very start of it, it starts off with a gigantic catastrophe in India. It's a kind of wet bulb thing, which means that basically that something like 20 odd million people died in India right at the very start, and horrific deaths. And that basically made people wake up to the fact that that something had to change. And unfortunately, it's going to have to take something like that before people will realize that if a mountain of money is no use, if the world is going to end, it's just not. And the trouble is, of course, that, and as you hit the nail on the head when you talked about a finite planet. You can't have infinite growth in a finite planet. You just can't do it. The laws of physics means that you can't do it. The trouble is, of course, is that people want to feather their nests now, and it's all well and good. Again, it's all well and good for me to say this, but when is enough enough? Well, we can actually redesign the economy for people to have enough to live, and I'm talking about every single person on this planet. And it would actually, we're producing far more than we require at this moment in order for people to live long, happy, healthy, fulfilling, successful lives. And I'm talking about the poorest people in the global south. And I've seen the calculations. People like Jason Hickel are writing about this, who's awesome, by the way. So check his work out if you can. He's a young anthropologist, really, really good. And he's done some really excellent calculations, saying basically that we're at the moment we're producing far more than we actually need. And really, what we're doing is we're producing enough for people to make lots of money. But in actual fact, it's not about life. It's not about lifestyle. If it's about lifestyles, then we wouldn't have to produce as much. So we just need to have a fundamental rethink about what the economy is and what the economy is for. And at this moment in time, we have too narrow a focus on what the economy is, and we've lost sight of what the economy is for. The economy is a process by which we organize our stuff in order for us to live long, happy, healthy, fulfilling, successful lives. Okay, so in other words, the economy is subservient or subordinate to that, to our well-being. So, and I advocate for this well-being economy idea, that basically what we need is we need to reconfigure the economy in order to make sure that what we do is maximizing well-being. And I've written about this, and I've written about the role of social enterprise in creating a well-being economy. And but the trouble is, it's so depressing. I mean, we because we have new governments, and immediately they come in on the premise of we want to grow the economy. And why do you want to grow? They don't explain why they want to grow or why they need to grow. Because basically the more growth happens, the more that the growth is actually being scooped up by those at the very top. And we saw it all the way through COVID, trillions of pounds being hoovered up by the top 1%, not just the top 1%, the top 0.1 of the 1%, So it's depressing, but we need a brand new conversation, and we need to wake up to people and stop thinking about them as being, lunatics on the fringe. The whole degrowth agenda needs to be brought into the mainstream and needs to be discussed properly, and it needs to be discussed. And we're not talking about reducing everything. Some things have to be reduced, of course they do. Some things have to be increased. But we need to start thinking about the economy in the round and what it's doing and how it's performing. Of course, we need to de-invest in carbon. Those industries that are contributing to the climate crisis. But there are various industries that we need to grow quite significantly. So we need to have a far more sophisticated conversation than we're presently having at the moment, including at a political level, most especially at a political level.
I know. This is like, honestly, I think, the problem is the leaders of these conversations, they are not prepared for it.
They're not brave enough.
And also they have no idea what they're talking about. It's basically all based on ideas and, ideological agenda, whether it's left or right or center, it doesn't matter, but they don't know what they're talking about. Sometimes, right?
I mean, basically, they're down to in order just to get elected. And
Exactly.
Once they start spouting this stuff, people say, "Hang on a second, why is that different from what we've been told over the last 50 or 70 years?" And people are so they're going to default to the mean, which is basically to start talking about normal stuff, which is we need to grow the economy.
Sure.
And that mantra all the way down, and it's depressing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always like put the example because sometimes I have this conversation with colleagues or maybe when, some of my guests in our podcast, it is like when you talk about health, right? I mean, it's been proved by science that eating ultra processed food is bad for you, right? It attacks your liver, it attacks your heart. You're going to have problems in the future.
Yeah.
What does that mean? It's good for you to eating this, but behind this, there is this massive lobby of, overproducing these and selling these. And okay, of course, I get it. I mean, there are a lot of jobs involved in this. But as you said before, we really need to start to think and talk seriously about these cases without this kind of like ideological approach, but rather with facts that something has to change. That has to change.
Yeah, and putting the blame onto consumers is, it's not about consumption. It's genuinely not about consumption. And
yeah,
I get it. I get it. Some people say, "Well, I don't want to eat processed food," but in actual fact, that's all that's available. And people make a rational choice of saying, "Well, if I get this, then I can give X amount of calories for Y pounds," and that's a rational choice for a lot of poor people. So. Yeah, but the problem cannot be shoved onto consumers the whole time. We need to start. People need to step up and start taking. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks. And we just drove away to another topic, but going back to the Brexit thing, do you think that are there any standout examples of organizations that perhaps have pivoted successfully post-Brexit initiatives and how we can learn from them?
There are people doing great work, despite or because of Brexit. I mean, I was speaking to people at CEIS, Community Enterprises Scotland, recently, who are a kind of they have a they're an really interesting body because they're an intermediary body, but they also a social enterprise in their own right, and they've been the longest running intermediary body in the UK for I think for 40 odd years now. They've been doing some really cool work on the International Social Enterprise Observatory, for instance, and that's quite a new initiative which is really going strong. Of course, they were the ones as well who started off the Social Enterprise World Forum as well. And I think that there are some good people coming up with good ideas, and some people who are stepping up and providing leadership, and signalling even in the post-Brexit environment that UK is open for business and is open to new ideas and is open to new partnerships as well. So I think someone like CEIS would be a good example.
What is that? Sorry, what is
CEIS? It's Community Enterprise in Scotland. Well,
okay, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. So listen, like this is a great idea. So, you know, you mentioned before about this opportunity for research in the sector, in our sector, and enterprises in our sector to keep building up, you know, friendships and partnerships with people from the global, at the international level overall. So what would you suggest, you know, for fellow researchers or social enterprises to keep opening this opportunity to partner or create networks with people from other regions, especially with the, you know, in the Brexit ecosystem that we have now?
Yeah, very much so. The trouble with always dealing with crisis is that you're always looking down the whole time to say, look at what the next crisis is that's coming through your door, and that's draining, frankly, and it's really tough. And I know it's very difficult, but sometimes it's very refreshing to look up every so often and to see what is the landscape like. Who are the new kids on the block? Who are the new countries where new policies are happening? Are new? Who are the new people who are making waves on LinkedIn or whatever, you know? And it's always that takes time and it takes energy. And trouble is, of course, energy is short, time is short. But what I would say is to advocate to people just to say, this investing time, this is an investment, and it's investment in yourself, it's an investment in your organization. It's basically to try and keep abreast of what's happening elsewhere, and not to be subsumed by the everyday, not to be subsumed by everyday crises. I actually think it's really important to reach out to people, to make new friends, and to make time for coffee, and to meet with, you know, your local politicians or whatever. It's important you do that, and not to be subsumed by the everyday crisis, because that would it's just going to grind you down. It's going to grind you down, and you're not going to be able to do what you want to do, which is support vulnerable people in your communities. We just need to try and have a different perspective on things, and try and maintain a different perspective on things.
Yeah, I agree. I think we also, you know, I know it's a very popular saying, but more than ever, we need to be the change we want to see, right?
Yeah.
I think we need, as individuals and as part of the society, to, you know, be more active and try from our own corner to contribute to the society, and do not expect others resolving the issues, because basically it's not going to happen, is it?
Yeah.
So looking forward, Michael, what do you think the future holds for the social enterprise sector in the UK post-Brexit?
I think that we'll finally get back on our feet. I think that we have a new government in the UK now, and a UK government which, to be fair, hasn't really signalled that they're that concerned about social enterprise. Frankly, I saw their manifesto, and there was no mention at all of social enterprise, really. But there are people within the Labour Party who get it and understand it, as you would expect. And I think that the power of communities, I think, is going to have to come through, and is going to once we see some policy innovation, I think once they sort out the finances. I mean, I'm going to do sort out the finances here in quotes, because a lot of that I think is performative at the moment as well. A lot of that is signaling that, you know, that they're a safe pair of hands, that they signaling to the markets that they know what they're doing, and so on and so forth, and shoring up the markets and the pound, etc. And that's all going down well, seemingly. But at the same time, they need to start getting back to the day job, and the day job, frankly, is not shoring up the pound or signaling to markets. The day job is actually making a difference to people and making a difference in communities. So until they actually do that, people start seeing more money in their pockets, start to see things working again, start to see less holes in the road, starting to see, you know, more shops opening, starting to see more people in employment, starting to see and starting to put the grim times behind us, you know, then I think that that will start to signal a bit of light, a chink of light, shall we say, to the social enterprise movement, that they have things to offer, and it's not just about and innovation will start happening again. I said it at the start that I'm never. I see innovation happening all over the place, but quite frankly, it's depressing to always be working in a crisis. So if we start putting some of these crises behind us, then I think we can start to see new things, new partnerships happening, particularly abroad. And I would really like to see us opening the doors again. And I mean, you said earlier about Scotland, Scotland having a reputation overseas for being, I mean, I wrote about it years ago about potentially being the most supportive environment in the world for social enterprise. I would like to see Scotland regain that mantle and regain that reputation, because I think it did damage to itself over a few years where we started to be too introspective. But I definitely think that if we got out there again and started to move in circles where people are having great ideas, then I definitely think that the future is going to be bright again. And I just want the future to be bright again. I want people to have hope.
Yeah, true. So my last question, Michael, and you know, thank you again for being with us. For our listeners, you know, maybe some people, they don't know where to start. And we always kind of talk like read more, start from wherever you can. So if you can maybe like suggest to our listeners maybe three, you know, like pieces of work, or it could be an article, it could be a book, to understand, you know, basically, as you said, the anthropologist, for instance, to see where we are now in terms of Brexit, and then what we can get inspired to start to collaborate and contribute more to our communities.
Yeah, I think that it's very important for people who are working on the day job and handling crises all the time. You know, that's you know, and I have all the time in a day for people who are doing that. And frankly, it's incredibly necessary. But it's important to look up, as I said, and I think doing things like just broadening your perspectives on things. So what I was saying earlier around the Wellbeing Economy, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, for example, has if you go to their website, they have an enormous amount of resources which you can look at and you can read and see and have a look at and think, how does this relate to my own situation? How does it relate, you know, and makes people understand to think about how your own situation relates to the wider economy, because everything's connected. Everything, you know, from the you know, there's a great in fact, that would be my next suggestion is to look at works by Gibson Graham. This is a writing team, critical economic geographers. Unfortunately, one of them's died now, but the partnership. But if you look in, they have a wonderful model, which is basically an iceberg model, which shows what the economy is, and how the stuff that's visible at the top is really the only stuff that gets counted, and really all the stuff underneath, a lot of the stuff that the social economy works in, you know, and have a think about how everything is connected. And then I would maybe recommend maybe some books by Mariana Mazzucato. Mariana is doing some wonderful work here on the role of what we call the entrepreneurial state. So in other words, that the state is not to be dismissed as something which is fat and bloated and never innovates, and all the innovation can be found in the private sector. What she basically makes the argument for is a lot of the innovations that we hold up today as being the most wonderful, you know, cutting edge work were actually funded a lot of the time by public money. But she's also doing some really wonderful work on missions, you know, and in actual fact, one of the most bizarre things recently was seeing King Charles opening a parliament where he says, "My government will be a mission-led government," and I just thought, wow, that's cool. That's one for Mariana Mazzucato there. So she does a lot of work on missions and things like that. So that's what I would suggest is for people to explore to well-being economy stuff.
Okay.
Have a look at some of the older work by Gibson Graham, which is just fabulous. It's really, really nice. It's good, and it'll get you to understand community economies, so on and so forth. But also the work of Mariana Mazzucato is what I would suggest to people. I could go on like this for a good while, and if you wanted to read my own work, then please reach out to me. I'm happy to give you any papers that are behind paywalls, but most of my work, in fact, all of my work, you can find online for free.
Sure. Actually, for the listeners, you're always gonna have this information in our description, just down below the video. Okay,
Great
I'm
stuff.
gonna share Michael's work and also like the ones that he suggested. Michael, it was an honor having you in our podcast. Today we try to explore, because there is a lot to talk about,
Yeah.
you know, in simple terms, and overall Brexit and the role of sustainable organization, enterprises and social enterprises in this new Brexit era. We appreciate you giving up your time. You know, we know you are very busy. I think we learned a lot. Thank you for that. And we see you later.
Thank you very much, Andrea.
Okay.
That's great.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Regards
Cheers.
to Felipe.
Thank you.
Okay. Goodbye.